To the Wildlife for Lunch, Understanding Your Remarkable Riparian Area webinar, presented by Sky Jones-Lewey of the Nueces River Authority's Research Protection and Education Director. Funding for the Wildlife for Lunch webinar series is made possible through the San Antonio Livestock Exposition, Inc. If you are looking to obtain CEU credit for today's webinar, you must attend the live webinar. You must complete the post-webinar survey. When you close out of the webinar today or when the webinar ends, a survey will automatically pop up in your window and you must complete that survey. At the end of that survey, you must provide us with your name, address, and applicator's license number. If you don't know your applicator's license number, you can put your driver's license number in. Okay. And on behalf of Texas Wildlife Association AgriLife Extension, I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. I'm going to go ahead and get this passed over to Sky. Sky, give me just 1 second here to make sure that you can take control. Okay, and Sky, it's all yours.
Thanks, Courtney. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lunch hour about riparian areas. I'm excited to have this opportunity to reach so many people from my desktop. Today I want to go over some little understood, often misunderstood things about riparian areas. They are areas that have not had the focus that uplands have had in the area of land management, and so there's not been only a budding understanding about these areas in Texas. And so what we have found over the last 6 years of doing riparian workshops with landowners along the Nueces River are that we have been able to give them some information that is not widely available. And through that course, we have changed some ideas, changed some people's thinking. And we thought we might have that encounter. So in the beginning of the Riparian Network, we developed a test, and we gave everybody a test to begin with at the beginning of the workshops. We've had about 40 workshops on land with landowners in various scenarios, and we gave this test. Now today we're not going to take the test, but I'm going to go over with you some of the ideas that have changed as a result of that. We had Oregon State University analyze this for us and do an evaluation, and they have told us the results of changes in people's paradigm. So one of the things we asked people first off is what they thought about the removal of water-loving species like sycamore and willow and aquatic plants being the best way to increase stream flow. Here, there's an often strongly held belief that when you take plants out, you get more water. And what we found is a change in thinking when after you understand how riparian areas function. And the one area that there was a wholesale change in belief was the primary result of a flood, the primary benefit of a flood. Everybody still likes floods in rural areas, especially in the Nueces Basin. People count on them to charge up the system, but they didn't. They started out before the information was delivered, appreciating the cleaning out process, where a flood comes and cleans out the debris out of the swimming hole. And after understanding riparian function, people began to appreciate the building up concept, what's happening in the floodplains after a flood. Another question that we asked in our test was, do rivers want to be straight or crooked? We had some changes measured here. Of course, rivers want to be only functional, and if that means crooked, then that means crooked. Oftentimes we have spent time and effort and money to straighten streams to get water off of land faster, and we are learning now with the current climate that we need to keep water on the land longer. Another question was most Texas riparian areas need to have brush and trees removed in order to restore desirable vegetation. We saw a change in this as a result of this education effort. Fallen trees and logs should be left in place where they fall or drift into a creek. This is another area that people had a wholesale change in belief. We asked people, which riparian area do you think is the healthiest? for the most part, we didn't see much change here. People, you know, one is a winter shot and one is a spring shot, so it's pretty easy to love the one with the vegetation. But that is the key to a healthy, functioning riparian area is vegetation. This was kind of a trick question. If this was your riparian area site, what would you do first? And you have to look close as a land manager to see signs of some hindrance that might be occurring here. It's certainly not taking the gravel out or planting more trees. If you'll look closely, you'll see that any vegetation that would try to grow in this area would probably be eaten. So that was a big change. Here is a place where people held on to their belief. And I'm not sure if it's a biological situation or just a fear of snakes, but which side of this creek would you like to own? And side B is still a very popular side to own. And people have all kinds of reasons for claiming that, safety and snakes and grandkids. And I think people may be more like wild turkeys. They're not comfortable watering or visiting a water hole that doesn't have opening. I don't know how deeply seated this is, but this is even with information, people still prefer or are more comfortable with an open riparian area. So what we found in the course of this is that most mistakes, most problems with streams are caused by a wholesale belief in a myth. And these are some of the myths that we've identified about creeks and rivers that are widely held, believed in a wholesale manner, without the tools to dissect them, dissect these myths into truth and fiction. Then we are bound to acting on these myths, and that has caused problems for rivers and riparian areas. And I'm just going to run through these, and then as we go through the webinar, I think you'll begin to get the tools. At least that's our goal, is to give you the tools to dissect these myths and make better decisions on the land. The first myth is that floods are bad. They're only bad if you don't have a functional riparian area. Droughts are bad. Well, it's not fun going through the droughts that we've had over the last year, but certainly it's the time when riparian areas get ahead, and I believe you'll see that. Streams should be wide and straight. Large wood clogs creeks and should be removed. The removal of riparian vegetation increases stream flow. Cut banks are bad, and the last myth, that people have to fix them. So with that, I'm going to bark right off into the lesson for today, starting with a definition of what is a riparian area. You know, only about 10 years ago, we didn't even hear this term in Texas. So it's kind of new to our population and to our area, and so it's important to define that. And the riparian area, see if I can get my pointer to work here. The riparian area, you can probably see, starts about right here. It is the fringe of vegetation. It's marked by a fringe of vegetation, and it's the area that separates the upland from the watercourse. So this is a riparian area, and that's the area we're going to focus on today. You know, it's only a very tiny piece of the landscape. Probably 1% of the landscape is riparian, but the benefits, the function, the values produced by that small piece of landscape certainly has gotten my attention and has caused us at the New Oasis River Authority to focus very clearly on that piece of the landscape where so much, it's so dynamic, so much is going on, and it produces so many of the values that people appreciate about creeks and rivers. Today, actually, riparian function has to do with soil, water, and vegetation, and it's the interaction of those three things. This is where they come together in the riparian area, and it's probably better viewed as the cogs of a finely tuned machine. So that if any one of these cogs gets worn out or broken down or broken off, the machine isn't going to function right. Today, we're going to identify some of these values that people appreciate about riparian areas. And this is what motivates people to pay attention, because they value something about that area, that waterfront, that riverfront land, that live water. Those values, though, depend on the people that are involved. The people on the left in this picture are more concerned about bird habitat. The gentleman in the bottom is concerned with forage production, and they both have a high appreciation for values produced by a riparian area. So some of the more common values that we appreciate include clean water and a reliable supply of water, abundant livestock forage. Some people are highly focused on the fish and aquatic habitat, or the wildlife habitat, or just the natural beauty and recreation values that streams and rivers can produce. But we have found that if we can set these values aside and look at the creek for its function, see how it operates and why it operates the way it does, then we can all realize what it is that produces those values that people appreciate. So that's the one thing that brings us to common ground in a riparian area. Now we talk about functioning condition, and maybe you know that when you see it, but we need to really understand what it is that makes a riparian area functional. And there's a definition. It was developed out in the western United States, where these areas have been studied for many years. And also you have the public agency, private sector interface that occurs when you have public lands that are leased for private operation. And I think that's probably what drove this focus on riparian areas in the western United States. And they came up with this definition, which it works. Properly functioning riparian area is one that has adequate vegetation, landform, that can be rocks or valleys or meanders, or large woody material. Okay, so if a riparian area has these three things in adequate, one or more of these three things in an adequate quantity to do the things on the left, to dissipate, primarily to dissipate stream energy. That's the number one most important thing that has to occur in a riparian area. Or if you can't dissipate, if you don't have the adequate vegetation, landform, or large woody material to dissipate stream energy, then you can never see the rest of these things: stabilizing banks, reducing erosion, trapping sediment, building floodplain, storing water, flood retention, and groundwater recharge. So if you have adequate vegetation, landform, or large woody material to dissipate energy and stabilize banks and so on, then you get water quality, water quantity, forage, aquatic habitat, wildlife habitat, recreational value, and aesthetic beauty. So only really if you have the physical function, if a riparian area is physically functioning, does it then produce the values. Oftentimes we look at streams and we demand values from them. Even many of our regulatory processes do this. Demand a certain level of dissolved oxygen, or a certain water quality criteria, or a certain kind of fish habitat, or a certain amount of riffle space. We demand a value without giving due consideration to whether that stream can produce that value. So this creates conflict. So if you look at function on the ground, sometimes you can clearly see we have in Texas functional riparian areas like the one you see on the left. And on the right you see one that's fairly dysfunctional. So this is an image of what function kind of looks like on a creek. But what this represents is an overlooked opportunity. An overlooked opportunity to catch water and store that water in the land. I think you can see clearly that the photograph on the right, this is the same place by the way, is storing water, is catching water, and the one on the left was not. So if you think about how many miles of streams and creeks exist in our state, and how many water processes and water supply projects that we have planned and we're going to need, then you can see hopefully that there is an opportunity. There's an opportunity on the land to keep water there. And that is that opportunity is held privately in Texas by the landowners. So the people who own the land along a creek or a river are really the water managers in our state. Now we're going to delve into what really makes this function work and help you get some tools to dispel some of those myths. And first we're going to look at the relationship between the soil and water. We realize that this is a three-part equation, and it's the interrelationship that is important, but we'll narrow that down to what they call hydro-geomorphology, and it's really based on the energy in a raindrop. There's a tremendous amount of energy in a raindrop, and when that raindrop hits the surface, it's going to collect in the channel of a creek or a river. So as those raindrops collect, they produce base flow. And that is the portion of water that in a perennial stream that's typically there. Then, when you have a lot of raindrops accumulating, and we have some runoff, the creek will reach what's called bank full. That's bank full capacity. Just before then, it's going to overflow into the floodplain. So you see now that it's important that the stream is able then to get out here on the floodplain. Once it gets to bank full, and this is the kind of flood that happens every 1 or 2 years. It's not the 100-year flood that is most sensational and does all the damage. The one that does the work in the stream is the one that occurs approximately every 1.5 years. And so when we talk about this we need a common vocabulary here in order to have an understanding of this. And bank full is one of those terms that usually engineers use, but real people can use them too, and it has a real good meaning, a real important meaning. So over the millennium, over time, streams have created channels that accommodate a given amount of runoff and sediment. It's really a stream's job to move not only water, not only accumulated raindrops, but also sediment. So a certain amount of sediment and a certain volume, velocity of water runoff is going to create a certain channel characteristic in a given landform over time. And so channels have set themselves up, and they're in all kind of shapes, and they have many classifications for this. But in reality, your stream or creek or river probably fits into one of these channel types. And then they will change. Channel types will change if, especially if man has tried to change them. This should give you a clue here about rivers being crooked or straight. This is the Walla River in Oregon, or in Washington, I believe, eastern Washington. On a flood, a big flood, this was one of the sensational floods. This is not the 1.5 year flood interval that does the work primarily, but a catastrophic kind of flood. But you can see that man channelized this river into a straight, wanted that river to be straight, wanted it to move quickly through the valley, and wanted to preserve the farmland along the side. And the river came along with a big flood and said, this is where the channel wants to be given this amount of runoff and this amount of sediment. So rivers are going to find their channel based on the inputs, and they're going to create these meander patterns that they need to dissipate energy. This is a diagram showing you why, and it was always a mystery to me, is why does a river squiggle through the countryside? Why does it not run straight? And that's because water does not travel straight. It travels in a corkscrew, like this little diagram here. It doesn't travel in a straight line. So as that river corkscrews around a bend, it eats a hole in the dirt bank or the gravel bank of that channel, and then it deposits that material over here so that you have this cutting erosional bank and a depositional bank over here. So that's what we mean by cut banks are not always bad. what material needs to be cut from a bank in order to be deposited on the other side to create a meander bend. And this is where the high velocity water is going to travel right here in the center of that channel, and this is where the low velocity water is going to travel over here, which allows sediment to fall out. So that's just a little understanding about how rivers bend and why they're not straight. Here comes the floodplain involvement to energy dissipation. Remember I said that a functional riparian area had to have energy dissipation, and it does that through landform being meander patterns, or large woody material, or vegetation. Something is going to dissipate, be able to dissipate that energy in stream flow, in floodwaters. So here's how a floodplain works to dissipate energy. You have the active floodplain adjacent to the channel, and when you exceed bank full, then that water gets out over a floodplain and it spreads out, and it makes the high velocity, it gives that high velocity water a place to go to chill out, to cool off, to slow down, and to drop sediment. This is an important concept. We're not real comfortable with rivers spreading out as humans. We are much more comfortable with them traveling in a restrained manner. That's what a floodplain looks like on the ground. This is a river that is at bank full right here. It has base flows probably down in here somewhere. Bank full being right here. So this is the 1.5 year flood interval. This is the working flood, and as soon as it gets a little bit higher, it's going to get out here. And what is in the floodplain out here that's going to help it dissipate energy? Lots of vegetation, some large wood, lots of energy dissipators in this floodplain. So that's going to allow the stream to slow down, drop sediment. And why is dropping sediment important? Well, because first of all, we don't want sediment in our reservoirs downstream. I mean, that's a very obvious benefit of having a functional riparian area. But if you think about it, the sediment that's dropped is high in organic matter, and that's going to store water. That's going to help keep water on the land. So dropping sediment, flood mud out in the floodplain is a good thing, and that's where it needs to be functional. Also, flooding recharges the water table, and this is a great diagram. By the way, Steve Nelly did these diagrams, and if we had more expertise on our team, we would have even more elaborate animations here. But I think this is very helpful for people to be able to see, first of all, that the water table and the water in the stream are connected. They're the same water. There's no difference here, functional difference, between the surface water, the base flow in the stream, and the water in the water table. It's the same water. So the water table now is feeding that base flow. That's how streams run long after rainfall has passed, because they're being fed by this, what we like to call a sponge, but the riparian water table. So as flooding comes along and you exceed that bank full and get out into the floodplain, that's what builds that water table. That builds the water table and keeps it charged up, and therefore keeps base flow happening long after rains have passed. Now, if you have excess energy and not enough energy dissipation, let's see what can happen to a channel, because if you have more energy than the stream channel was designed, remember the design that happens over a millennium, if you have more energy than the channel is designed for, then it's going to eat away at the sides, not just the sides of the meander bends. It's going to eat down. We call this down cutting or incision. It's going to eat down and down until it's made itself large enough to handle the velocity of energy coming its way, being delivered its way. And you think about the whole catchment area and what kind of changes man makes on that. catchment area with roads and diversions and stream crossings and pavement and parking lots and so on, cultivation, land clearing, different kinds of cover, and those are the kinds of things that affect the amount of rainfall runoff occurs on the surface and how fast it's delivered to the stream channel. So when you have those kinds of changes occurring within a catchment, then you have these kind of changes occurring within your channel. And it will get wider and wider, deeper and deeper, until it reaches the size that it can accommodate that new delivery of flood flow, runoff. And if you look at where the old channel was and now where this newly created, adjusted channel is, you can see a lot of material is gone. Well, that material went downstream. Either it was trapped in somebody's functional riparian area downstream of this situation, or it was trapped behind a reservoir, in a reservoir. This is not a mystery. It actually all occurs in accord with a relationship that is very predictable. This is called Lane's relationship, and it is basically a relationship between sediment and water. Because remember, a stream's job is to move not only water, but sediment. And if you're in the process of building a crossing on a stream or involved in the construction of a bridge in your, on your creek, then you want to sure enough remember this, because not all engineers do. Remember that these things need to be designed to let sediment pass as well as the water. And there's some serious repercussions if we don't let the sediment pass. So let's back to Lane's relationship. You can see now that water and sediment is in a relationship with each other. And this relationship also takes into account the slope of the stream and the size of the sediment. So that if the size of the sediment is changed, in other words, gets smaller or larger, how can this happen? Changes in the water catchment can cause this to occur. Then that is going to affect the stream, the balance here, and make this side over here gets heavier. This arrow goes over here to agration. In other words, you have the build-up of sediment in a stream channel, flattening of a stream channel, and see if I can get rid of these, and if your stream slope should change or the amount of water should change, then that's going to drive this arrow over here toward degradation, and that's going to give you the down-cutting, the channel down-cutting that we just witnessed. So know that this is not a mystery. This is a relationship. There's a calculation that goes along with that relationship. But this particular relationship here is demonstrated without vegetation. In a little while, we'll see what vegetation does to buffer this. This is strictly the physical relationship between water and sediment in a stream. It's pretty handy to see. And we actually have, Steve Nelly made a model of this that we can use, a tabletop model, where you put a little more sediment on one side or a little more water on the other side, and it shows you just how dramatic this swing can be. Here's an example of what happens with too much energy, just in accord with that Lane's balance. More energy was delivered to this system than it was designed, to this channel, than it was designed to accommodate. And what happened is it cut down right here to try to accommodate and widened out, and then it wasn't enough, and it did it again. So the channel is going to keep on changing. People don't like to see their channels change. If they paid several $1,000s an acre for this land, they don't want to see that channel change. And oftentimes people will come in and try to make a fix on this, and not understanding what the stream is trying to accomplish, you can spend bazillions of dollars and not get the result that you're looking for. This stream will heal itself, and we'll see in a minute how that occurs, but it's never going to be back up here. It's going to heal itself down here at a new elevation. Now, here's what downcutting, that same scenario, does. By the way, I guess I should have said where this is and why this is. This is up in the, Kenneth Maben provided us with this picture. It's up around Weatherford, where he's from, and there's a lot of development up there, a lot of parking lots, a lot more runoff, and these very fine sediments and these small streams. The channels are adjusting themselves to carry that flow and to carry it off of the land. So here's what downcutting does to the water table. You think about this now. This is where water is stored. This 1% of the landscape, if it's in functional condition, stores all of the water that's got to last these streams all through the dry periods. And that's what accounts for the base flow. If a channel receives too much energy in downcuts, like the one we just saw, then what does that do to the water table? The water storage capacity has been reduced. The water table is now lower. And this is a very hard concept. People who are operating on the myth will believe that they can get a bulldozer and dig this channel out and have more water, have a better swimming hole. And it's just simply not the case. What happens when you deepen a channel, whether it's done as a naturally as an adjustment to a more increased runoff, or if it's done intentionally in trying to accomplish something, deepening the channel, down cutting the channel is going to drain the water table. You're going to have less water to sustain base flow, not more. Down cutting does another thing, and this is what sometimes holds streams in non-functional condition for longer, and that is that it loses access to the floodplain. So we had our nice channel up there in a floodplain. Let me go back to that. Here's bank full right here. So when you have just a little more flow, it's going to go out here on the floodplain. That's the way it works. Well, when you have down cutting, the channel is now incised, it's deeper, and there's that same amount of water, the same volume of water that was in bank full, cannot get out on the floodplain. It can't reach, go back to that again, it can't reach out here at bank full anymore. It now takes a whole lot more water to get out on the floodplain. And that's very important because the floodplain is what dissipates the energy and allows you to trap that nutrient-rich sediment, which is going to hold water on the land. This is another picture courtesy of Kenneth Maben from up around the Weatherford area. Again, it's very fine sediments, but this was a tiny, tiny little creek that received a tremendous, tremendous amount of runoff and downcut. And just to give you a small example, he says, this clot right there is the size of a refrigerator, and that one about the size of a small car. So this downcutting here has lowered the water table, has drained the water table. See now, any water stored in the landscape up here is now going to be drained, not held in the stream or on the land, but drained off of it. So this is a headwater stream, okay? Now, the ones we've been looking at were not confined by a rock layer underneath. They could just keep on cutting down until, there's no limitation. This headwater stream, a little higher up in the catchment, has a limitation in that it has a rock layer right here that's going to limit its ability to cut down. But the question here is, where does water come from in dry times? Well, it comes from water that's stored in that water table. Now, the water table is a little bit different looking on a hill country stream or a headwater stream in that rock layer is holding the water table up. And so it has a little different configuration, but it's the same philosophy. And the water stored during a flood that's trapped and caught by this riparian sponge and stored and build building that water table is then what will deliver the flow back to the stream during dry times. This concept is true in all streams from here to Alaska. Riparian function works this way on all perennial streams. You get into intermittent and seasonal creeks, you can see some of these processes, but it doesn't quite work the same way. But it's not a geographic limitation. The same strategy for function is occurring on all creeks and rivers, not just in Texas, not just in Oregon. This one is sitting on that rock layer that we were talking about, and all of this material here has been deposited and trapped by the stream itself during floods. So it's created a sponge. This is a huge water holding storage sponge, probably more efficient than any reservoirs or tank dams could provide. Now, we talked about excess energy and what that did to a channel that was down cutting. Well, here's a channel that's sitting on bedrock. It's a headwater stream, and it's sitting on this rock, so it's not going to be able to cut down, but what it'll do instead is get wider and wider. If more energy is delivered here, not enough energy dissipation, and more accumulated raindrops from whatever reason with too much energy, is going to eat away at the stream channel in the same form and fashion, but now you're going to have more widening, over-widening instead of incisement. So that here's what's left of your water table, this little tiny piece, and all of that is lost. That is lost water storage capacity. This is what it looks like. Way too many of these creeks and rivers and the headwaters look like this, and hopefully now when you see one of these, what you're going to see is what's missing. All of this material is missing. All of this water storage capacity has been eliminated from the picture because excess energy, because no energy dissipation. If you look up here on this bank, if this is indicative of what was on the bank here before it washed away, you'll see not much energy dissipation, huh? Not many plants, not much adequate, not adequate landform vegetation or large woody material to dissipate that stream energy. That's why we harp on the stream energy dissipation as the primary process that's going on. Overly wide stream channels lose their ability to transport the sediment. We talked about earlier that sediment and water both have to be transported by a stream. And they are, Lane's balance shows us that equilibrium, that relationship between them. So when you have a overly widened stream channel, like we just saw in the photograph, then the stream loses its ability to move sediment. That energy is so spread out that sediment can't be moved, and channel structure is lost, and water temperature goes up, and on. You lose value. Some of the values that you appreciated here in this hill country stream might have been cool riffle habitats for particular kinds of fish. Those are gone. Those are not able to occur with this sediment load and the channel's ability to move it, the stream's ability to move it through that channel. So degraded and eroded channels, I'm just kind of overseeing some questions that are popping up, and we're not going to take the questions, but perhaps some of this discussion will answer your questions. Degraded and eroded channels will restore themselves. We don't have to get in here with bulldozers and cement to make this work. These channels are able to recover. This is a process, a very large natural process been going on for all time. And it starts with the very first vegetation, begins to trap sediment. This is that overly enlarged, incised channel, the first one we looked at, where energy has caused this channel to cut down, and then wide, until it could accommodate a new volume of water. So the way this channel is going to repair itself is over here on the edge somewhere is going to pop up a few new plants. And those plants are going to trap sediment, and the next time the creek or river rises and it has a little more sediment in it, that sediment's going to be trapped by more plants and more plants. And this is high in organic matter. This is water holding material and held in place by more and more vegetation. The stream will develop a new channel, perhaps the same size and shape as the original channel, assuming that is the amount of sediment and water that's being delivered, and it will be functional. It will become functional again, but never back at the new elevation. So the water table will remain at a lower elevation. Now that recovery process starts. It absolutely starts with a little bit of energy dissipation and a little bit of sediment trapping. And one-on-one, one after another, these streams will become functional again. You can see the new riparian area. It's not up here where it once was. It's developed a new floodplain, a new functional floodplain, all down here at a lower elevation, which has, in this case, doesn't need woody material, has enough vegetation to dissipate the energy and trap the sediment. You can see some of the fine sediments being trapped right there in that little cutaway, and store water. So all of that is now storing water, and that stream is functional again at a different elevation. Here's a little photo point taken on the new ACES after a big devastating runoff event. Downcut this bank almost in one event, several feet, and took a tremendous amount of sediment downstream. And then one by one, little bitty things, little bitty nonchalant plants, sometimes some of the ones we call gravel bar pioneers that just are willing to march out there and take a chance. And then here you can see that more and more of them have caught more and more sediment, and they've provided a nursery for more advanced plant life. Here the bank is completely covered now in sawgrass, and tremendous amount of storage capacity being developed there. So streams were going to recover. That took about 10 years. There's no way to tell exactly how long. It's not going to be fast. It could be faster than you imagine, depending on the sediment that's delivered and the kind of plants that are able to establish there, and depending on if people are in there molesting them. Recovery starts with just that one plant. Here's the recovery process on a bedrock confined channel. The green being our juvenile attempt at animation to indicate that a plant is going to start this, but then sediment is now trapped, and pretty soon you can almost recover all of your elevation if you haven't had incision. Now this should give great hope to headwater streams, tiny creeks on the headwaters that have confinement, because this can fully recover. You can regain your water table entirely in those kinds of streams because they haven't been incised. They still have access to the floodplain. Here is the riparian sponge. Here is the expert on riparian sponges in Texas, Steve Nelly. And here are all of those sediments that have been trapped on top of a bedrock layer right there. Underneath that creek is a bedrock. That's what the stream riparian sponge looks like, and we've been telling you all along here that vegetation is the key to that, function. And so I think you can see clearly that this vegetation in this picture is yielding to the production of the value of that clear flowing stream. Now, there's all kinds of riparian vegetation. We found out early in our work with riparian landowners that it's all great and good to talk about these plants, but if we don't have a common vocabulary, if we don't understand which plants are doing what, then we're missing a lot of opportunity for understanding. And so we produced a book called The Remarkable Riparian Field Guide. It's now in its 2nd edition because many riparian plants had never been put in one binder, in one place, as a visual identification tool. So we published this book. It highlights about 87 riparian plants. The book is fairly valid across Texas until you get to the east, where there's just so darn many plants. But Central Texas, even up on the plains of Trans-Pecos, many of these are the same plants. They're doing the same job. We need them all to do these jobs in order to keep these creeks and rivers functional. So we're happy to provide you with a copy of that book. If you want to email me after the presentation, we'll mail it to you. I wish that we had a more elaborate distribution system for that. It's very homegrown. We put it in an envelope and send it to you. There's no cost. It's free. We had it funded, the production was funded by a set of foundations that are dedicated to this purpose, and I'll just go ahead and give them credit now. The Dixon Water Foundation, the Shield Airs Foundation, the Meadows Foundation are the 3 primary foundations that funded this work and helped us to produce this field guide to riparian vegetation. And this will help you a lot. In the field guide, these plants are categorized by their stability rating and by their wetland indicator status. Now, those are 2 terms that have all kind of bureaucratic applications and regulatory applications, but what we were getting at is their functional value. And here's how that vegetation that's specialized in growing in riparian areas functions to buffer the impact of Lane's balance and Lane's equation. So we looked at what happens when you have an increase in the amount or change in the size of sediment that's delivered to a channel, or what happens when you have an increase or a decrease in the amount of water that's delivered to a channel, or a change in the slope. And then one way to change the slope, of course, is to straighten a stream. We saw the Walla Walla River, who had its slope increased because it was straightened. The meander pattern helps to decrease the stream slope. So vegetation is not accounted for in Lane's balance, but we are accounting for it here in the middle as a buffer, because that's basically what vegetation does. It buffers these physical processes. That's why it's a 3-legged triangle in a riparian area. It's that relationship between the soil, the water, and the vegetation. Vegetation dissipates energy, and that's what we need most in a riparian area, and it helps reduce this erosion, and it traps that sediment in the banks, in the floodplain, where it belongs and where it can do a lot of good and help increase and enlarge that riparian sponge. It all boils down to slowing water down, and vegetation in the riparian area does this very well. Many of these plants are suited for that kind of environment, for high disturbance area, and they thrive in these areas, and they're doing their work there. They're doing the heavy lifting. Just give you a little example of what vegetation can do to recover a stream. Now, there was no mechanical fixes, no engineering designs applied here in Burrow Creek between 1981 and 2000. Only a change in the grazing management that allowed the vegetation to grow. And now you have, or had in 2000, I haven't seen this creek lately, but in the year 2000, there were many young willows and a lot of vegetation that preceded that helped to cover this whole barren gravel, cobble stream bed with water trapped in sediment. It's a miraculous thing, but this is what a creek wants to do if we can get out of its way. The Bear Creek example is the best photographic example that we have. This series of photographs was taken in Oregon over about a 20-year period, and this was one of those creeks where the riparian principles were first applied. If you don't believe that this is the same photograph, pick out one of these trees up here on the slope and prove to yourself that this is the same place. In 1977, I have to give you some backdrop here. In the 50s, people thought that Bear Creek was losing a lot of water to the willows. This thing was lined with willow trees, and people thought the best way to get more water downstream in reservoirs was to take the willow trees off of Bear Creek, and they did that very efficiently. There was an aerial application of herbicide. It killed the willow trees very well. Willow trees are not hard to kill anyway with herbicide. And a flood came after that at some point, and the creek lost its energy dissipation from the vegetation, from the lack of vegetation, and it was scoured down to the bedrock. So that's the scenario we have at the beginning photo point area, is that this is bedrock. We've lost, this creek is down cut. You can see that from the bank to bedrock. It's been scoured out, and there's not much energy dissipation in what is left of the floodplain. All right, well, that was in 77. The change that was made here, and there was a change made, it wasn't an invasive change, it was more of a removal. This area had been under continuous grazing for about 100 years, season long. And so what they did to jumpstart this vegetation is they removed all the livestock for a couple of years. And then they went to grazing it in a different way. And what that allowed is this vegetation that had never been allowed to grow before, because it's probably some of the tastier forage on the range, was allowed to grow, and it trapped some sediment. And by 1996, that's 20 years, went from a seasonal creek that was extremely incised, that had a no continuous flow year long, and very denuded riverbank here, to a very functional creek that's trapping sediment, storing water. It's now a perennial stream. This is one of the blue ribbon trout streams in the area, and this was done by changing the grazing management, removing a hindrance. The stream was wanting to recover. It was trying to recover, and all it needed was someone to remove the hindrance. And the hindrance in this case was the harvesting of the vegetation before it could get up to the height needed to dissipate energy. That scenario runs from 1976 to 1994. On the bottom, this is Wayne Elmore. He's one of the leading experts in the West on riparian areas, and he's the founder of this photo point. But you can see that I hope even an untrained eye should be able to see that the bottom photograph is storing water on the land, and the top left was not. All of those values that people appreciate are produced by functional riparian areas. A strong riparian plant community is the essential part of that equation. It is what holds the soil and water in balance, in relationship. It's what buffers the lanes equation. So it's not just any kind of vegetation. If you start watching your vegetation in your creek and river, you'll be able to see that it's going to fall into a couple of categories. Plants that are early on the scene, we call them colonizers. They are the first plants to march out into the channel and try to stabilize and capture sediment along the periphery here. They are some of the early colonizers. This one, I believe, is frog fruit, and it's helping to trap just a little bit of sediment. Then after that colonizer has set the stage, then a big stabilizer like emery sedge or maybe willow or buttonbush or some of the other stabilizers then can move into those areas. There are some plants that grow on these high energy gravel bars on the Nueces that people just don't like. They just cannot love Baccharis and bricklebush, but they should love them because these are the pioneers. These are the first things to grow out there that are going to trap the very first sediment and allow the next thing to happen. So flooding is essential in this equation. If flooding can occur, if you have access, if the stream has access to the floodplain, and you have the energy dissipators, the sediment trapping vegetation in place, then it's during floods that so much of that rich material is trapped and so much of that water storage is built. Here's my personal photo point. I was always told that I should do a photo point, and unfortunately I didn't do it right off the bat. Took some more. In fact, somebody had to come and take that first photograph. But after that, I did get into it, and now I'm very happy that we have almost 7 years here of photo point now on the Nueces. This area, I'll tell you the story that goes behind this. This is the Nueces River. This is at my personal place, northwest of Uvalde. This area, these stream beds, were heavily trafficked by off-road vehicles for about 15 years prior to 2005 when legislation halted that activity. So plants that tried to grow in this riparian area were chewed up by wheels. Doesn't have to be cattle, it doesn't have to be sheep, it doesn't have to be axis deer. There are all kind of things that can destroy or hinder riparian function. And in this case, it started with the wheels. And once the wheels were removed, a tiny little bit of switchgrass was remnant, actually, on that point there. And that's about all that was out on that gravel bar. But in 2008, a small rise brought a line of sycamore seedlings. You can see how the seedlings lined up right along the flow path. And so that debris that came, the little debris line that was left, and it was a tiny little thing, inches wide, that was left after that flood in 2008, left enough seedlings, and with no vehicle traffic to disturb them, we had the growth of this switchgrass, that remnant colony, and the growth of all of these little sapling sycamore trees. And that was the colonizer. Sycamore really is more of a colonizer. It doesn't really, it's not the best stabilizer on the block, but in these hill country streams, a really good way to jumpstart the process. In 2012, I just took this the other day, between 2008 and 2012, the stream was dry, bone dry, several times, 3 times, I think. This last summer, this particular area went dry for about 4 months in a row. So much so that the trees were beginning to get, the little sycamores out here were beginning to get crispy. But what was happening during that drought is that these plants, these little saplings here, when the water got low, their roots were going down and down and down. So that when you have a drought, it's not the end of the world for the riparian area because the sinking water table is being chased by the roots of these plants. Oftentimes, riparian plants are deep-rooted, fibrous-rooted, and they're going to run after water. And pretty soon, they're going to run under the channel, and these over here are going to run under the channel, and they're going to meet. And they're going to cradle this stream and hold that channel in place. So drought is not fun. It's not pleasant. But if you need something to appreciate the next time we have one of those summers, go down to a riparian area and watch what's happening to that vegetation, because that's when it gets ahead and a whole lot of recovery can occur. The stream channel is narrowed. I want you to notice that. See how wide it was in 2007, and it really wasn't a channel. It was just big and flat. And so the channel has narrowed. The water is being stored. It's a recovering situation. I'm excited about watching it. Woody plants are essential in...
Sky, can I jump in here for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Folks, we have reached the 1 hour requirement for CEU credit. So if anybody needs to go ahead and jump off, feel free to close out at any time, and that CEU survey will pop up. And once you complete that, we'll get your CEU certificates will be emailed to you next week. Please, anybody who wants to and can, please stick around. But if you do need to hop off, you have met your requirement. Okay, Sky, back to you.
Well, we only have about 3 or 4 more minutes of this actually, so I'll just buzz right on through about the woody plants and their stability ratings. We think that these hill country streams like the Nueces in Uvalde County and other streams like this, that you need a stability rating of an average of a 7. Now you get down in the lower sections of the Nueces where the stream channel is flatter, there's not as much slope, and you can get by there with a 6. But these numbers are assigned to the plants for their ability to stabilize banks. Little walnut is a very unsung hero of a lot of these headwater streams, even into the the seasonal and ephemeral draws up in the hills. You'll see little walnut surviving there, surviving through many dry periods, and it's a great stabilizer and energy dissipator, and a stability rating of 7. That's just an example of the kind of woody material you need. You need some woody materials, and they need to be in good shape. Unfortunately, the vigor can be compromised on these plants. If your riparian plants have their vigor compromised by over-browsing, like this particular plant is a button bush, but beyond recognition almost by browsing, then imagine what has happened to the root structure. And the whole purpose of these plants being there in the riparian area is to hold that bank together during floods and dissipate energy, and you lose that stability when you lose plant vigor. Unfortunately, we see a lot of this. Wildlife and livestock is going to tend to conglomerate on the banks because that's where it's nice. That's where they want to be. People want to be on the banks. Everybody wants to be along the river. So if your vegetation vigor is being impaired by that, that's certainly can be a hindrance. Dead wood is essential. Leaving trees, dead trees, they're beautiful on the bank when they're alive, but they're still functional when they're dead, and they help a lot in stabilizing these banks. So hopefully after this seminar, and perhaps even before, you have developed an eye for the riparian story. And so when you see a stream like this with chiseled banks, with no tall vegetation along, you should be able to see that you're missing function. When you have, our paradigms get set by what we've seen all of our life. So all of my life, I saw stream banks that looked like this because we kept them looking like this through continuous grazing. And I thought that's how they were supposed to look. But the truth is, and I think you can develop an eye for this, to see streams for their function. You know, there's a fence line right there. Here's the energy dissipation, and it all stops over there. So if you can develop an eye for function, then we're going to get the values from these streams. Here's the bottom line. How to protect and manage your riparian areas. Everybody wants the easy way. They want the one thing they can do. And the one thing you can do is realize that they are special places, that they deserve preferential treatment. You can't treat your riparian area like you treat the uplands. It doesn't work the same way. And if you can identify the hindrance, if there's something hindering the stream's ability to recover and remove that hindrance, that's what you need to do. Now, we have built a small list of hindrances here. These are some of the most common and obvious ones. Not to say this is happening on your stream bank. It's important, if you want to accomplish riparian function, to find the one, to find the thing that's in the way. And oftentimes people don't want to deal with that thing. They want to deal with something else. So being able to look honestly, critically at your stream bank and identify what it is that's inhibiting that function is a tremendous tool. That is your best management tool. These are just some obvious ones. You know, obviously farming too close to the bank, mowing or spraying that vegetation down too close to the creek, manicuring, highly altering the landscape next to the creek. And again, it's hard to give up that paradigm. People like to see the river, they want to see the water, and they don't want the grandkids to get bitten by a snake. So you can still manage in a way that reduces this hindrance by alternating your manicured areas, manicuring in a meandering way instead of a straight path. I mean, there are things that can help still have function, still aid in function. Grazing concentrations in creeks. If the livestock is loose and has access to the creek, that's where they're going to go most of the time because it's the nicest place to be. But fencing it is not always the answer. There are other ways. There are ways to manage your country to keep that hindrance from becoming a hindrance. Excessive deer, exotics, and hogs are a tremendous growing problem, and we like to think that's outside of our control as a manager of land, but there have to be creative ways to keep those animals from becoming a hindrance to riparian recovery. A lot of people love fire. Fire on the uplands is one thing. Fire in a riparian area is a completely different thing. So before you apply that tool to a riparian area, you need to ask yourself, what hindrance are you going to remove by burning it? And I think if you ask that question critically, you'll realize that this is one instance where the riparian area is different than the uplands and probably has to be treated differently. The removal of large dead wood is a huge, has been a huge impact, we think, and that includes burning those dead wood piles. Dead wood, especially in a high energy stream, a flashy headwater system, is very important. And that wood needs to be getting buried up in the channel and buried up in the gravel deposits and added to the stream channel. And if it's not there to do that, then we lose stability. Artificial manipulation of streams, banks, and sediment is far too common. That should never be done lightly. And you perhaps want to ask yourself the question, what hindrance am I going to remove with this bulldozer? And if you can answer that adequately and honestly, then maybe that's the right tool. Excessive vehicle traffic, low water dams having all kind of impacts on that slope equation. Poorly designed road crossings, which can also have an impact on that slope equation. Excessive recreational foot traffic, just like the livestock, can be rotated. Excessive alluvial pumping is something, and a huge disconnect here. We don't like to admit that pumping water from a well is having any impact on a stream, but in many cases these alluvial, wide alluvial floodplains, it is. So that's the bottom line. It's really all about people. This is why we have focused on people that own riparian areas. They are potentially the water managers of our state, and given the information about how streams and rivers work. Given a common vocabulary and a common understanding, this riparian community can solve a lot of our water problems. Alrighty, that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions. Courtney, are you going to read the questions to me, or how do we want to deal with it?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start reading the questions, and folks, in the meantime, if you have other questions that haven't been answered yet, please go ahead and type them in the chat window and send to all participants, and we'll get to those down the line here. Okay, a couple of our questions actually got answered during the presentation, but here's a question for you, Sky. It says, is the area below a ranch pond that receives water only when the pond overflows after a good rain considered a riparian area?
Oh. Well, it seems to me that you would want it to become a riparian area. I mean, you know, there are a lot of legal definitions and regulatory definitions of wetlands and riparian areas, and those are for a different purpose. But if your purpose is creating that value on the landscape, then you would want to have as much riparian area. You want that thing to be expanding. You want to be growing your riparian area. So it's possible. You could have even where tanks overflow, where other kinds of water is delivered to the landscape, whether it's a leaking water trough. I have a riparian area set up around a cement water trough. And it's just an experiment, but it's an interesting one, and it certainly brings value to my life. And that is because that water trough was leaking, and we tried to patch it a lot of different ways. It never worked. So I just plugged some eastern gamma grass in there and watch what happens. Watch how that water is processed in. So I would say, yes, it can be a riparian area if you treat it like one and appreciate it like one. Then you might even be able to harvest some of the values.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you. Our next question is, earlier on in the slideshow, you talked about some of the myth-busting that those test questions had done. And the question is, are there sources to document some of the myth-busting statements?
There are. You know, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not an academic. All about application. So if you're interested in those kind of resources, I can turn you on to the people and the literature to support those. I believe so. I think that would
is that maybe
research, but yes.
Is that maybe a good instance of perhaps those folks should email you and you can help put them in touch with the right people? Okay.
Yes, I would. And I also I have a collection of technical papers posted on the remarkableriparian.org that might help identify some of those things. But let me just address the tonality of the question, which in my mind, these myths, the reason we called attention to them is because we believe that it's the wholehearted belief. Now, every good myth has some truth, or it wouldn't be believable. So it's about having the tools to dissect that myth and not be bound to act on it at face value. So in some places, streams want to be straighter than others. Not to say we don't need to argue over that. It's understanding that a stream is going to meander and how and why. That's important. So that's the tool. That's the ability to dissect that myth. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you, Sky. Our next question is, a creek flows through my ranch that is spring-fed and has never stopped flowing. Can I improve the riparian area around this area by building a small dam across the creek before it leaves my property? It currently flows at 2 to 3 inches in depth, and bank full is around 4 feet.
So you know the terms. That's great. That's great. You know, it's our philosophy that it's hard to improve on a riparian area by doing anything. It's usually by stopping doing things that we improve a riparian area. And a dam is going to change a lot of things. Look at lanes balance and analyze that. I mean, we can't, you know, for all of these workshops, for the last 5 years and the 40, some 35 or so workshops that we've given, I have refused to answer a question about what to do or not do on your place, because you have to answer that question. We want to give you tools to do it. I would say your considerations need to be related around Lane's equation, because putting a dam, a low water structure like I listed as a potential hindrance, is going to change the nature of that relationship between sediment and water. So if you're going to change that relationship, you should at least know what to expect as a result. I would not expect more functional riparian area. I mean, if you identify the hindrances and remove those, that's how you're going to get a more functional riparian area. And so when you go to your creek next, you look for hindrances, look for things that might be inhibiting the plant growth and plant vigor, things like this. All right.
Okay, great. And our next question is actually kind of along the same lines, which is it possible for a stream to be dammed or bermed to create a stock tank without significant negative impacts to riparian function?
Well, it's all you know, it's all a judgment that you make as a manager. Hopefully you make those decisions with tools. That was our goal, is to give people at least this understanding. Then when you're installing a tank, you're installing a tank for a reason. You want to accomplish something. And so now you can know or have some ability to calculate what some of those results will be. I'm certainly not, I mean, you know, if you take the value equation out and you look at function, then we can all agree on how function occurs. And then when you start making sacrifices there, then just you've got to know that there's going to be a result of that. There's going to be a reaction to that. So, you know, I'm of the opinion that there's a way to mitigate everything. If you need a stock tank, there are some mitigations, some ways to recover possibly some of these functional values in other ways. Like the first question even, about the bypass or the overflow channel. You know, but those are things for you to think through long and hard. With this information at hand, you can make a better decision. There are many resources on our website, remarkableriparian.org, including some technical reference manuals that go way into detail on these systems like this, standing water systems and running water systems. So there are some resources out there. They're not widely available, but you can get them off of our website. And I would encourage you to ask yourself those questions. Those are great questions to be asking, and they will cause you to find better solutions.
Okay, thank you, Sky. Our next question is, in rural areas, there's room for the stream to reach equilibrium. However, in urban systems, the riparian zone is constrained, and the increased volume and velocity leads to rotational failure of the bank, which leads to threatened built properties. What are your thoughts on requiring upland buffers for riparian areas?
You know, there's so many cities struggling with this, and I've had a lot of fun visiting with some urban organizations recently who are dealing with this very quandary, really, because the city's already built, and land is already owned, and creek banks are already developed, and so where's the floodplain? And, you know, I have also seen people who have taken the most proactive roles in land planning and urban planning to install creeks as drainage systems in new developments, perhaps in the upper portions of the catchment. So, you know, taking the creative, open approach to applying riparian function is there's unlimited possibilities, even for cities. It's not, we've already paved our banks, so we're, you know, so there's nothing left to do. There is much more that can be done and considered about improving the riparian areas that are left, the floodplains that are left, including perhaps going in and, you know, making the decision to let the stream have a floodplain again. But also by working upstream in areas that aren't yet developed, protecting them in a way. And when I say protection, I'm not just talking about who owns the land, but understanding riparian function, protecting that energy dissipation value, but also installing riparian function in developments instead of ditches that run water straight and increase velocity and deliver more sediment to streams. There are some very good examples of this going on. Alberta, Canada is one area. The Canadians have been, I just saw recently the London Rivers Plan and what their plan is for urban areas. So if you're an urban engineer, I would encourage you to look at what's going on with the most creative, cutting-edge urban riparian people, because they're doing it. And when you do that, when you use riparian function as your drainage system, nature is, the creeks are the original drainage system, you get all these values that you don't get from a concrete ditch or a pipe. It's amazing. And I'm not sure why it's taken us so long as a civilization to come around to that. But it's a tremendous thing. The London Rivers program, check that out online, what they're doing. And they're basin-wide, it's catchment-wide, not watershed-wide. That's a little different way to look at it. You know, we don't want to shed water anymore, we want to catch it. So if you look at these watersheds as catchments, and catching the water at the top all the way to the bottom can help that function recover. And there may be pieces that are still in ditches, but there are other pieces, perhaps enough other pieces, that can be energy dissipators to make the system work.
Okay, and our next question is, I have a seasonal stream that mostly has a rock bed. What kinds of suggestions do you have to improve the area? The stream is at the bottom of a hillside, it's not a wide stream, and there are a lot of trees on the edge.
Of course, again, you know, not being able to see your creek, and there's no way I could, you know, get that right. But I can tell you what to look for out there, and I love those kind of creeks, those ephemeral and seasonal creeks, because you're never going to get this riparian function without water. You know, it's the water-soil vegetation relationship. Without the water, you only have the other two. But I think there is hope and things to appreciate in those streams. And I've seen some rugged draws up in the headwater areas, and there's some sure enough beauty and value associated with them. And their ability to manage flows occasionally, and even big ones. And if you'll notice, those components that exist there are probably going to be big boulders, probably going to be things like the walnut, the little walnut trees that are tremendously functional. They can dry out. They can go long periods without water, and then can hold on through floods. So I think you should still look at the hindrance list, even if you don't have the water component available to really make riparian function follow the rules. You should still look at the same kind of hindrances, because it may be that you have browsing that's impacting the walnut, for instance, if it is walnut, that's your primary energy dissipator there. So I'm a big advocate of love it like it is. Watch a little, do a little bit, watch a lot, because then you not only are not going to do too much of the wrong thing, but you're going to learn from it. So, you know, keeping a photo point, keeping a journal, identifying the plants, looking for hindrances, even if it's if you're not in a water-rich environment or a perennial creek, looking for those hindrances like browsing or grazing or some disturbances that could be affecting it, and then loving it like it is. It's not going to be, you know, there are seasonal creeks that have become perennial, like we saw Bear Creek. It was a perennial creek. It was the destruction of the riparian function led to it becoming seasonal, and it returned. So if you're in that situation, again, it's identify the hindrance. If it has always been a seasonal creek and it doesn't have the water component, then you may not be able to reach this level of function that we've been looking at here. But there's still wonderful things to appreciate about what's going on there. And they're certainly important. Those little flashy arroyos are very important to the system.
Okay. Isn't the new angle of repose from the degraded banks providing the protection of the toe to allow establishment of new plant material? And what about the establishment of invasives?
Yeah, boy, well, of course, absolutely, yes, yes, yes. That's true. That bank, the one that we looked at on the Nueces, had reached that point. It didn't take it very long to reach that point. And then a little set of vegetation was allowed to grow. Now, take it from the other side. So you get their angle of repose, and you got your toe, and you've got an axis out there eating everything that tries to grow. Are you going to get recovery? No. So geologically, you're set up for it, and you have to also allow it to happen. You have to make sure that you're not hindering that recovery. So invasives, yeah, they're going to hang up right there too. That very photo point started accumulating floating arundo stalks in that sawgrass, and they took off like crazy, and that can be a huge hindrance. They're going to be quick to capitalize on those kind of places, and if you don't have an invasive control procedure program in place, you're probably going to need one because they are becoming widespread problems.
Okay, and Sky, this may actually not be a question up your alley, but we have someone who wants to know if you have any suggestions for online sources or other sources for understanding how to implement this information in managing ponds or tanks. My thought on that would be to look for your local NRCS agent. I don't know if you have any other.
Well, yes, you can. Oftentimes, though, since this riparian thing is so, you know, has not been widely available, most of the NRCS agents are now up to par on their riparian management practices, and so probably so. But if you'll look on our website, there are two technical references, TR15 and TR17, I believe they are. One of those is designed for standing water systems because, yes, an area around a tank is riparian and can be riparian and can offer some great values and is eligible for many NRCS riparian programs like the CCRP program. Can be used to buffer tanks, keep their water cleaner, catch the sediment before it gets in the tank, stabilize the bank, provide habitat. So all those things, yes, occur on standing water as well, and there is technical reference material for that. You can look at the remarkableriparian.org. I keep saying that, and I apologize that our site is very homemade. It's not very flashy. It just is there, and the material is there, so you have to look, and hopefully you can find it.
Speaking of that, actually, Sky, we've gotten a couple questions, and I just tried it myself, that the remarkableriparian.org takes us to a site that requires a password to log in. It says it's
no kidding.
A secure site. Is it
a secure site?
Yeah, the site I'm going to is just www.remarkableriparian.org. Is that correct?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, I was there recently. Let's see. Well, I tell you what it does is we bought the URL and we directed it to the Nueces River Authority's page, because if you go to the Nueces River Authority website, the page for riparian is very difficult to find on the website. So that's why I went ahead and bought the remarkable riparian.org URL, and it ought to take you to the Nueces River Authority website. Now, if it doesn't, you just Google remarkable riparian, and you'll get the Nueces website, the Riparian Project website.
Okay, so...
And you'll get the field guide. Let's see here.
On the Nueces River Authority website, the field guide is easy to find. It's just over there on the right-hand side. It's a clickable link there.
Yeah, you should have a whole list of resources, the TR, Technical Reference Order Forms, Steve Nelly's 25 riparian notes. Those are tremendous resource there. There's a lot of things there. So let me get my technical people to make sure that that's not redirecting to the wrong place. But you can also find the page on the Nueces River Authority website under Contracts and Programs, Riparian Network Project. I know that's kind of cumbersome, but that will take you to the whole thing. And the TR-17, we're talking about the technical reference about tanks and standing water logic systems. Wait, let's see if this is it. Is there. The PDF is there for both of the riparian technical references. And I will get with my IT person and see why it's being redirected to a password-driven deal.
Great.
Give me till this afternoon on that, please.
No problem. It looks like that has taken care of all of our questions. Sky, on behalf of AgriLife Extension, the Texas Wildlife Association, I just want to thank you so much for being here today and for this unbelievable presentation and for the great knowledge that you conveyed to all of us. Folks, thank you all very much for joining us today, and I encourage you to tune in next month on Thursday, May 17th. Our Wildlife for Lunch webinar will be presented by AgriLife Extension's Larry Pierce, and he'll be covering integrating cattle and wildlife on small acreage. Again, for those of you who are looking for CEU credit, when you close out of the window, a survey will pop up. Just complete that survey, and you'll be looking for your CEU certificate via email next week. And if anybody has any questions or needs any more information about these webinars or anything related to them, feel free to email me. I'm Courtney Britton at the Texas Wildlife Association, and I've got my email address up there. I see there's some folks who are asking about the field guide. If you just go to that Nueces River Authority.org, it's nueces-ra.org website. Over on the right-hand side, there's a picture of the field guide, and you click there and you can request a copy.
Yeah, or you can email me. Is my email address up here?
No, I think, Sky, if you'll go to the next slide, it may be on that one.
Oh. Oh, yes. Duh. Here it is. Yes. Now, this URL is supposed to be redirected to Nueces River Authority, but here's my email address. So send me a little email. We'll get you a field guide.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you all on the next Wildlife for Lunch webinar. And Sky,